Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Kilger. I'm the managing editor of Feeding Grain magazine and the host of the Feeding Grain podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today as we dive deep into the issues affecting the feed manufacturing, grain handling, and allied industries. Today, I'm speaking with Mac Marshall, Vice President of Market Intelligence for United Soybean Board and the U.S. Soybean Export Council. We're talking about today's soybean markets, this year's soybean harvest, and the rise of the soybean crush capacity across the United States. Before we start, if you're listening to this on a podcasting app, please rate us and subscribe. If you're listening online, sign up for the Feeding Grain newsletter Industry Watch to see the latest podcasts, and of course, stay up to date with all the latest news from around the industry. Now, on to the show.
Good morning, Stephen, and thanks for having me on the program.
So, to start off, why don't you just tell me and the listeners a little bit more about you and what you do?
Delight to be here. My name is Mac Marshall. I'm the Vice President of Market Intelligence for the United Soybean Board, our soy checkoff. So, in this role, I serve on a strategy team and work with a couple other staff members to really help provide our board of directors. We have a board of 77 farmer directors who are
Mhm.
tasked each year with the pretty monumental responsibility of deciding where their investments are going to go for the next funding cycle to help set up and improve the viability and strength of the domestic soybean industry from a farmer standpoint in the years to come. So that's one piece of it, and certainly being able to talk through markets, developments, trends, see where the proverbial ball is going ahead of when the ball gets there. That's really all in the remit of what we do. And then, of course, the other piece is exactly what we're doing here, a lot of media, external speaking. I'm actually at a conference in Miami right now for aquaculture, and I just gave some remarks about soy's role there, as well as market developments. So it's fun. I've been in this role for about 3.5 years as USB wanted to bring on those capabilities back in 2020. So started very early on in the pandemic. It's obviously a lot more fun now than it was then because we're getting to get out and see people and actually get out on farms, go to production facilities. But prior to that, I had worked, well, first coming out of college uh, at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics as
Mhm.
an analyst. I got placed on a food and agriculture team, which was really the start of my voyage of discovery into the world of U.S. and global food and ag. I don't come from an agricultural background. There's no farming in my family. I come from the East Coast. So getting that bit of exposure initially when I started working in my first job out of college, I think was really instrumental for showing me how interesting the world of food and ag is, and that this was a place I wanted to spend my career eventually. So was in that role for about 5 years, management for a couple, which took me out of the subject matter of agriculture. I was more working on financial services, professional services, real estate, also within BLS. But something was missing for me, and that was getting back to ag as a subject matter. It's just
Mhm.
something about it that spoke to me. And at that point, now we're looking at about 10 years ago, started talking with Monsanto as then agricultural leader, major company, that was looking to expand again its analytical capabilities, particularly from an economic analysis and crop market analysis standpoint for their corporate strategy group. So moved out to St. Louis about 10 years ago and really knowing anything about the region. It's been great. I've been out there for about 10 years. So first had that role in corporate strategy at Monsanto, and then spanning both sides of the Monsanto and Bayer merger, I worked in a little bit more of a global market access type role with our international government affairs team. And so, sort of embedding economic analysis into the way that we would coach and work with governments to help enable and facilitate trade of agricultural products in which our company's products were key inputs. And then that brings us to here. Early on in the pandemic, I got approached about this role at USB. It seemed incredibly exciting, drawing upon a lot of prior experience and skills that I think honed and developed in time, particularly at Monsanto. And the time was right to come on as Asian, which I had not done before. And it's really been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed time working here over the last 3.5 years.
That's great. Well, number one, because like you, I didn't have an agriculture background, and it's
Oh, no
always
kidding.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like the sector doesn't promote itself well enough. 'Cause, for a long time, people are always trying to hire people with farm backgrounds and stuff, but I'm like, it's really amazing industry if you gave it a chance to outside people.
There's a couple things around that that keep coming back to me as common themes. So a couple weeks ago, I was actually at Honor the Harvest, which is an annual gathering put on by U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action, or
Mhm.
USFRA, and it's bringing together. They call it where the suits meet the boots, right? So you're bringing together really proactive farmers and ranchers from different communities across the country, really all the way through the value chain, going even into the financial side of the equation. So bringing together all these disparate groups. So you've got this intersection of everybody's kind of touching ag, but it's an intersection of people who have kind of grown up in the ag world, people who haven't. And there's one resounding theme. I mean, there's several resounding themes, but one just on this topic that I think was really coming out kind of at the tail end there was the need to have more and more points of view and perspective
Hmm.
and backgrounds that come from uh, non-traditional spaces. People who haven't grown up on a farm or grown up in agriculture, but have an interest in it.
Hmm.
And I think being able to showcase just that it is a very exciting and dynamic field to be in is, I could frame it as a challenge. I don't necessarily think it is challenging because the story of agriculture is so exciting. It's one that's always been of innovation, if you really think about it. Bringing more and more voices into it, I think, is going to be critical. When I look at my career, I've been very, very fortunate to have had the career that I've had, to have had the experiences, work for the organizations that I have. But if I'm really breaking it down, it happened somewhat serendipitously. If I
Yeah.
hadn't had that initial exposure to, learning a bit of the world of agricultural statistics and how to look at markets and just getting thrown into that as subject matter that I was going to be covering on a daily basis, I don't know if I would be here. So when we think about the future of agriculture, the really existential needs of humanity, of course, feeding humanity, but also being able to find more renewable sources of energy. So it's obviously got a strong role in that through biofuels. That was one example. As we think about the challenges of the 21st century, sustainable development goals, really all of this goes back to agriculture and farming as the starting point that really
Yeah.
kind of kicks off the flywheel for success. And I think another thing to remember is one way or another, whether we realize it or not, whether you live in a city or whether you're out in the countryside, independent of where you are in the world, agriculture does bind us all. We all need food, shelter, and clothing.
Hmm.
And I think as we recognize increasingly that it is truly a unifying tie through all of us, hopefully that'll inspire more people to get involved who are coming both from the traditional ag and farming backgrounds, as well as people who maybe haven't given it thought before. So it's an exciting challenge. And Stephen, I'm excited to hear that you've come from one of those eight traditional backgrounds as well, but have gotten the ag bug. Once you get kind of passionate about it, you can't shut it off, nor do you want to.
Yeah, well, especially since we used to be owned by the American Farm Bureau Federation, and it gave me an opportunity to get to meet people on the farm, farmers, growers, ranchers, all these people, and you start to realize that it really is just a great, great industry. Actually,
Yeah.
I think we might have someone in common in our past with Mace Thornton. I don't know if you know
Oh
him, but
yeah, yeah. No, Mace. That's another good point here. This world of ag does kind of keep recirculating.
hmm.
Once you're in it, you find other, maybe you're not with the same organization, but you still find other ways to help advance the industry and the understanding of it because it's the lifeblood of all of us.
It really is, and it's one of the friendliest, nicest industries you'll find too. I mean, people tend to be very, very generous, very kind. So anyway, now that we know our backgrounds, can you give us a little bit of an update on this year's soybean harvest in the United
Sure,
States? What's
sure.
what's going on with that? It's wet
What?
here in Wisconsin these last couple days.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I
doing
know
better
that
elsewhere.
very early on when it was clear that we were planting 83 and a half million acres of soybeans. So it was down about 4 million acres from last year, as well as just an overall tight inventory position that we were looking at. That this was going to be riding weather market all summer. Weather always is an influencer of price. And so that when the condition reports come out, that's what a lot of people are looking at. So not to be champion of the obvious there, but when you have a tight supplies there, you see, I think, a lot more swings in price that are responding to weather. It just becomes much more of a weather market. So that's a lot of what we've been in throughout this summer. We've seen some ups and downs, and now where we are. As we start to approach October, combines are rolling throughout the country. We've already seen harvest start in many parts of it. And actually, we're talking to a couple farmers this week who've started cutting recently. And overall, the crop size we're looking at is in excess of 4 billion bushels, 4.1 and change, I think, is the latest USDA estimate, and down from where it's been over the last couple of years. Again, I mentioned that area reduction, planted area this season. I mean, that's a key factor here. We had a lot more corn going to the ground, I think was initially expected. And my read on that is, well, let's look back to 2022 when there were a lot of signals to plant a lot of corn, but due to high fertilizer prices as well as availability issues in some parts of the country, not as much corn got planted as I think farmers wanted to plant in 2022. So I think we're seeing a bit of a lagged effect for that this year. Now, when it comes to price and everything, how the harvest is shaping up, I think right now, latest conditions report, we're 50% good to excellent, which is it's definitely the most pressure from a rating standpoint that the U.S. soybean crop has seen in about 10 years. But with continued sustainable intensification of production, as well as I think our farmers' overall resilience, managing through drought in many parts of the country for extended stretches this summer, there's a lot of heat wave. I live outside of St. Louis. There are a couple extended, and that's obviously an epicenter of a lot of agricultural production. I mean, we had a couple of weeks there where heat index was over 115, and these were coming at approaching some of the critical points of crop development. But overall, I think we're looking at strong crop. One is probably going to be like the sixth or seventh largest of all time when it's all said and done. And that's exciting. We've got to replenish the tight inventory position, and we've already started the new marketing year for whole soybeans. Exports are up relative to last year. So, crop that farmers are going to be delivering over the coming weeks, it's critical to bring that off and then help get it into the hands of buyers, both domestically and around the world. So, shaping up, I think, pretty well. Other things that are really impacting the overall marketplace right now, Brazilian planting of their 23-24 crops is already proceeding ahead of pace. That's, of course, on the heels of a very, very large crop for the 22-23 marketing year. Argentina is looking to rebound from an absolute crop failure this past marketing year, where production was probably about 40% of what was expected. So that large Brazilian crop there offsetting losses in Argentina, a couple of expectations of continued growth in production in both of those countries for this next year. Argentina really more of a rebound. Some of those things are kind of weighing on prices at the moment, but certainly $13 beans, strong pricing environments, certainly relative to a couple of years ago when we were in the trade war. But let's not forget that that's the revenue side of the equation for farmers. There's also a cost side. And while we've seen mitigation in fertilizer prices, the overall interest rate environment has, I think, presented a lot of challenges too. Farmers have to take on a whole lot of operating loans for financing operations, purchasing capital equipment, lands. So interest rates are, I think, felt even more acutely in the farming community than other parts of the economy. So there's never a year without challenges, but fortunately, we've got an incredibly resilient 500,000 soybean farmers out there in the United States.
Yeah, it's not talked enough about how these rising interest rates hurt agriculture as a whole, since it's an industry that does a lot of like short-term loans with banks. Same with grain elevators and all these other things. It's interest that's gonna really affecting their bottom line at this moment.
I think about I'd hate to have to refinance a house right now. I was able to do that when rates were really low, but when you've got to take out those loans each year on a regular basis, like you said, short term in some cases, that's just to set yourself up for producing a crop, which you'll get paid on for several months down the line. So
Hmm.
that intertemporal nature of it, that timing of farmers having all this outlay and then the actual payment for the crop is deferred. I mean, that's bearing a lot of risk, and I think really is probably another underappreciated part of the farm economy.
Definitely one that's not talked about enough, I think, too. Agriculture kind of gets ignored in those discussions of what interest rates are doing to people. So the market seems a little strained for soybean producers right now, but hopefully we'll get better in the future, right? It seems like everyone and their mother is building a soybean crush facility. That those markets improve within the next couple of years here.
Well, I think that what are the environment that our farmers are selling into and will be selling into is one of of, I think, pretty robust demand here. When you see the level of investment towards new crushing facilities, some of which are already coming online this marketing year. There are a couple in Iowa, I think, that are coming online in this marketing year
Mhm.
that will enable more crush there. But really thinking about some other parts of the country where this upwards of 30% expansion domestic crushing capacity, certainly some parts that have been historically underserved where farmers haven't had that local point of delivery crush facility as a local source of demand. So some of the underserved areas like North Dakota, Western Minnesota, where you've got three new plants coming in, close to that area, that's not historically had crushing. So farmers in that draw area now have a new point of demand, and that means they're not taking as much of a basis hit. That's money back in farmers' pockets. That's really critical. But the crushing expansion is really, I think, reflective of a new season for the world of soy. And what I mean by that is reevaluation and a reappreciation of the value and versatility of soybean oil, right?
Mhm.
This wave of crushing expansion that we have coming is different from prior iterations of when there have been expansions. Now, there's never been one of, this sustained magnitude over a multi-year period. And I think it's important to remember that historically the need for expanding crush has been born on the meal demand side. Now, meal demand, I think, still remains very, very robust overall. That's really tied to the strength of protein demand and the need to scale up animal protein production to help feed growing mouths that are increasingly demanding animal protein. So there's kind of nice steady demand there on the meal side of the equation, but it's the oil piece that I think is really interesting right now. Historically, oils carried about a third of the value share between meal and oil for soybeans, but over the last 2.5 years, thereabout, it's really been over 40%. And a lot of that has been driven by this push for decarbonization of the economy in California, the implementation, or rather scaling up, I guess, of the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard that is creating more and more incentives for using base feedstocks that are renewable, such as soybean oil,
Mhm.
as inputs for producing renewable diesel, which is a drop-in fuel and a petroleum diesel replacement. So it's an interesting time where we've got all this crush coming online, but the rationale for it is different.
Yeah.
Crushers want to crush for the oil. The deals that are coming together to help finance these expansions are not ones that we would have thought typical up until a couple of years ago. You wouldn't picture energy companies entering into joint ventures with agricultural companies, but that's what's happening. Chevron and Bunge, just I think, is one very notable example where Chevron's looking to get the soybean oil for renewable diesel, and Bunge is getting a scale up in their crush capacity. And what does all that mean? Well, that means increased meal availability, which is going to be great for animal agriculture here in the
Mhm.
US, but as well as for exporters. Our meal exports up 6% relative to last year. We're on pace to, I think, set a volume record. And as we have more crush capacity coming online over the next couple of years, really through 2026, I think we're going to see that trend continue where, we're both advancing opportunities for more meal utilization domestically, particularly in swine diets, but also, opportunities for expansion to many overseas markets that have a preference for U.S. soy and that are also seeing scaling up of animal agriculture and aquaculture, poultry in many parts of the world, but also aquaculture. It's really exciting to see how that part of the value chain has been taking off.
Yeah, it is exciting, especially because, like you said, it's going to be kind of reflected through the entire supply chain because there'll be more meal out there. Hopefully, that will lower feed prices a little bit, make animal agriculture a little more profitable for people, and all these other things, which is good. It's something we could use. It's been a rough couple of years for people, so.
Can't take what the futures market says as gospel, right? Because there's
Mhm.
always things that can change. Again, weather, other disruptions that are out there. But, if you look at the futures curve, what the market is saying today is that over the next, 18, 24 months, we'll see a pretty substantial drop in meal prices. It's predicated on normal production, kind of a rebalancing of supply and demand. And that's certainly, going to be, if that comes to fruition, certainly, beneficial for animal ag, right? Like you said, the margins are tight.
Hmm.
It's been a rough period for I think a lot of producers in it over the last couple of years, but seeing some potential cost avoidance there by virtue of more and more meal making its way into the marketplace, that has to be a welcome sight. And it's a welcome sight for us too.
Yep.
We see, soy U.S. origin soy meal as, the true gold standard as plant-based source of protein for people and animals. And so as we have greater availability of that, it's a high quality product that's penetrating the marketplace more and providing I think more and more benefits to an increasing number of users.
Hi everyone, Steven here. Just wanted to tell you that Mac and I talked for much longer than this, and you can hear the rest of our conversation, and you can find the rest of our conversation in our next podcast, which we will talk about some of the innovations going on in soy, the soybean checkoff program, and a bunch of other topics. So please tune into that episode as well, and thank you so much for listening to the Feeding Grain podcast. We really appreciate it, and we hope you stay tuned. Bye, everyone.